Thank you. This is a small snapshot of the 34 Nordic fintech that are really pumping above their weight when it comes to financial inclusion in the emerging market, meaning Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. You've seen some of the other fintechs out in the hallway, and I really hope that you take the time to discuss with all of them, because they are really doing concrete solutions in the emerging market. But here we have 4. One is having 2 roles here, Sebastian. We're going to start with Selma. You're the CEO of Bright, and tell me a little bit about Bright and what you're doing and what challenges you're having in the markets you have. Well, you have brought a lamp here.
I brought the lamp with me, so first of all, thanks for having me. So this is of course about Fintech, but to be able to enable Fintech, you need energy. And you need sustainable energy. And this is what this product is about. It's actually a small power station. And this is the whole idea through Bright we're on a mission, and we want to provide sustainable energy products for all. So give me 2 seconds. We can hang it, we can carry it, we can make it into a small table lamp, we can pick it up, we can make it into a torch. Can you see that? Yeah, it's a little bit competing here. And you can put it around your neck. But most importantly, you can actually charge a mobile phone. This is the core reason why Bright exists. And we ship 2.5 million out of this, and empowering people every day to actually load their mobile phone and be ready for financial solutions.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Some of the challenges you're facing on the ground in Africa.
So we basically started to engage in East Africa, working out of Kenya. We set up a company in Kenya, and we're working on enabling our products inside microfinancing. This is another product doing exactly the same, except you can't wrap it around your neck that nicely. But as you can see here, we have actually embedded technology to be able to do microfinancing. And some of the challenges we have is, of course, that there's different providers. So from a technology perspective, we need to build systems into everybody. That's one challenge. The other part of the challenge is actually to find and engage with channel partners and distributors in the area.
Thank you. Going over to you, Thea. You just came back from Africa last night, so thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
Tell me a little about the projects and the pilots that you're having in Africa and the challenges Divala is having there.
Of course, grateful to be here as well. So Divala is a platform that gives any kind of education organization and an employer the opportunity to issue identity, to have an identity yourself as an organization, and then also give skill identity to your students. And what we see is essential as a part of that is that we're building trust back to information, right? Trust as a person in terms of exactly what you've done in terms of college, if you've done an internship, all the kind of experience that you've had. And we know that it's essential for the individual to have ownership of that information. Because the challenge is that when you go out and you need to walk around, you actually need to give physical certificates, or you need to actually travel with your certificates or go back and forth. And that's taking so much time and money currently to do that process, and it limits a lot of opportunities and also limits infrastructure in terms of a country as Uganda. One of the biggest challenges we have as an organization is that we're building trust from physical to digital, right? And as a part of that, also in terms of a new technology, what we've done very specifically is that we work very on the ground with doing local collaboration and doing things very tight and small to make sure that we don't run on assumptions, and we de-risk everything that we do by proving every time that we're actually able to implement and use the platform.
Thank you. Going over to Swedish iSettle, Magnus, you're doing quite a lot of good stuff in Latin America, in particular Mexico and Brazil. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing there and the challenges you are facing in those two countries.
Yeah, maybe starting off with financial inclusion comes in different shapes and forms, I guess, and we didn't start out with Latin America as a target market. As a matter of fact, we were pulled into those two markets by Banco Santander. But for us, financial inclusion actually started with the underserved rather than the unbanked small business owners. So that's what we did basically in Europe initially. And some of the challenges we had were about regulation and how to reach these smaller customers in a way that would make the finances work while meeting all the requirements of regulation. So when going to Brazil and Mexico, being convinced by Banco Santander that we really would be a good partner for them to have to address those markets, I was just thinking, how on earth are we going to deal with, KYC and AML in Mexico and Brazil? And, Brazil is actually by far the easiest market of all 12 markets we are in today when it comes to identifying to whom does this bank account belong, so that you don't have someone who signs up and gives you a bank account that belongs to him but claims to be another person. So because there you have a personal ID number, and that personal ID number is tied to the bank account, so you can't, differentiate those two. So small things like, I'm very digital, everyone has smartphones, and not everyone, but a very, very big crowd. So it's very fragmented. Mexico, 130 million inhabitants, 70 million don't have a bank account. So it's a very sort of diverse set of things you need to solve for. But I think for us, it has been the empowerment of small businesses. It starts with being a sole proprietor, which you bring them into the digital economy, which is really critical, and then maybe they can hire another person and so on and so forth. These companies in general in Europe account for maybe 25 to 30% of GDP, 1 to 10 employee type of companies. In Brazil and Mexico, they're close to 50%. So they are really the backbone of the economy, and a very large part is still informal, and we're trying to bring them into the formal economy.
Fantastic. Bringing over to you, Sebastian, you are born and raised in Uruguay, so you can really know about the Latin America side of it. And you also, the CMO of Ask Robin, one of the good fintechs that is having a booth out there from Estonia. But start with the ecosystem and the challenges in Latin America.
Well, first of all, afternoon to the audience. Latin America, it's a defiant market, but it's nowadays a greenfield. Everybody's there. Tencent is investing money up there. Now we have last month, SoftBank of Japan had raised a fund of $5 billion. So when I heard before in the end of the panel, trillion, billions, there is happening already in Latin America. Oh. Okay, it's a challenger market. Fintech scenario had grown 60% from last year. We have almost like 1,200 fintechs and growing up. We have already 8 unicorns. Maybe one of them is Nubank. It's a Brazilian card issuer. We also have Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre is started as an e-commerce marketplace. Last year, founder launched a very funny notice. The e-commerce marketplace raised $14 billion in business. Mercado Pago, which is a payment solution, 70 billion. So that's how payments are pushing the financial inclusion in Latin America. Let me stop a little bit in financial inclusion. Financial inclusion, when I see the pictures, I live with financial inclusion. Okay, so basically, financial inclusion is has above all the barriers, has one first barrier. It's the psychological barrier for people who is excluded. Okay, and I would like to specify one point. It's the cost of inclusion. Okay, because if you're an entrepreneur in the middle of Latin America and your overhead is close to break even, when you go to the system and you have to start to pay VAT, revenue, and all this stuff, it's really a challenge for entrepreneurs. So fintechs have made a great job over that. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to build on that because we've been talking about KYC data, right? And what we also is passionate about in terms of the wall is like, what kind of data do you actually look at to identify the skills and the passion and the grit in a person when you're living in a country like Uganda, if you're in Mexico, wherever it is? We need to look at a completely different system in terms of how we actually evaluate people and make sure they actually can access to basically de-risk the process to make sure like from that small bridge in terms of a female entrepreneur doing microloan SACCOs and building that into a business, that is grit, that is dedication. And that detail into data is exactly what we need, and that's what we need transparency on.
Fantastic. If there are any questions in the audience, please yell out, and there will be a microphone over to you. So please come forward with some questions. According to statistics, 95% of the population in the emerging market is using cash in payment. That was mentioned early on. I think it was Anne Karen's saying. So this is a challenge, and payments for government and business in cash and then move that over to accounts. Is that familiar in your scenarios, Sebastian?
I will take that because I love it. Me as a millennial, I live in the cashless society.
Yeah.
But still in Latin America, it's the misperception of cash is better. When we're talking about excluded people, they don't are. So they have cash. So they fund themselves. That's the psychological part that we are missing about financial inclusion. But economy without the system keeps working. So good stuff to make to convince regulators and policymakers is that to let them understand that if we include people, we will increase the base of taxpayers. But not only taxpayers, we will grant economic citizenship, we will grant rights of being, safety, combat illegal activities. The benefits is an endless list. But again, despite of the technology, of all the advantages of the investment, it's a mindset change that we need to face. It's about education. The financial exclusion, it's a consequence of the miseducation, of the lack of collaboration. That's a conclusion, that's a consequence, not a cause. So we need to attack education, we need to contribute in financial literacy. Fintech is a medium, it's not an end. So for me, it's important to share with us that in Africa, there's a lot of excluded people, Asia, Latin America, but at the end of the day, the people excluded in all the world has the same process. Outside, they don't have rights. So us fintechs are people who, with the education, we have a compromise that given the benefits are like the IMF said in Bali Agenda. So we have to encourage governments to address the benefit of going cashless, of increasing financial literacy, of collaboration.
I think it's World Economic Forum or World Bank that is saying that the two countries they follow in particular, Malawi in Africa, and then Mexico, it's going the wrong way, it's going more excluded. Any comments to the Mexican market?
Well, only Mexico groups the 3% of the world population which is financially excluded. Okay, as you mentioned before, they have like 50 million people. Contradiction, Latin America. Central Bank of Mexico is raising QR codes payments to increase financial inclusion. So again, the problem is not technology, it's not regulation, it's like it's habit of the consumption. Fintechs are good in easing the friction bank. So fintechs develop friendly friendly ways to use hard times, hard stuff. So that's the real fight. In Mexico, happens the same. Mexico has infrastructure, has capital, has potential of investment, but they miss the conviction. It's hard to translate with words because you have to live it. You have to change people's mentality to show them that it's good to be in the system because they grant rights and they will increase. It's like a virtuous circle. They will start to making good decisions.
Magnus, being in Mexico, how do you see this?
Well,
not the right way of development for the Mexican market.
Well, I mean, there are clear sectors of small businesses that benefit from being, in the digitized economy and being part of the formal economy. And we are participating in a lot of different programs, government-funded, where they try to help people set up businesses by providing subsidized tablets and other infrastructure required to take payments or to run a system where they can really keep control of the business. on one side, with MasterCard, we issue cards for people that don't have a bank account, so that they have a business and they want to receive funds. They can receive it right into the fund, to the card, and then they can use that to take out cash if that's needed, or pay with it. So those are initiatives that are going on, but it's a very slow process. I mean, it's no question about it. Even though I must say, Mexico for us is our fastest growing market.
And a big one.
Yeah, and a big one.
It doesn't need to be slow, but I think it's essential that we build with culture, right? Coming from the international development space, worked there in 5 years, we cannot look at a tech product and adapt it into a market. It needs to be built with local collaboration from the scratch in the country you're working on. And that's not going back and forth. That's being nitty-gritty in the process. And I see this happening a lot, even like if it's an NGO or if it's a tech company, it needs to be built with people in close collaboration and very, very iterative, close and iterative in terms of how you're actually defining the problem and solving the problem that you're working for. Because we've been working for a long time, going in, if we're talking about development countries or emerging markets. I don't really care for the words we use to define it, because we shouldn't. What's essential is that we just really understand how we work together. What mentality do we work with when we're there? And it comes with humility, and it comes with really, really being constant and close to, in terms of the work that we do collectively.
Very short comment on that. Financial inclusion is a trust process. So as a process, it's not forced bancarization. Okay? Inclusion is not open an account, because with the same behavior that the people has the account open, they will go to the bank, take the money, and take the same bad decisions. Okay? So basically, that's what we're trying to do in my startup. Okay? We're trying to trust to be a true advocate for the people. Because don't forget that when people look for credit, it's not for funny. 90% of the time they are suffering or having a problem. So we're trying to solve these kind of problems when we're talking about financial inclusion.
Bridging back to, come.
No, I'm just reacting to the story of the speaker before about, when she grew up with 7 kids in a room, right? And now there is another family in a different culture that lives with 5 kids in a room at this point in time. So I think still, we've gone through a development which is based on convenience and security and so on. That is valid still, So when you look at, you take what I have seen it creates lots of problems, but also enormous scalability opportunities in a system like the card payment system, for example, working in 200 countries around the world in more or less the same way. There is enormous strength in that, and bringing down costs for including people into that system. So yes, you can really go in and be very local, but I think there is tremendous advantages in the scalability of the systematic, giving these, convenience, security in particular, I think.
Yeah.
I just think that's where identity becomes so crucial and important, because we need to have identity management system that basically works across borders, right? And we need to define that in the way. And right now in Douala, we're very focused on actually how do we build a great decentralized identity management system. Because right now we've been working with Uport, and we've been understanding that's actually a US-based company, and we know that it works, but we're doing the same. We're having one partner that we still need to adapt, like it's Android 4.4 doesn't work. These kind of small nitty-gritty challenges. There's too much, like one app is, when you're downloading 2 apps, it's too much, the smartphones basically don't have enough room and space for it. These kind of things that you don't really think about. So that's why I also want to globally invite you in terms of if that's of interest point, because it should be, is that we really need to build a decentralized identity management system that works in collaboration across sectors. What we need to do then is we need to leave self-interest, and we need to look at exactly how should we do that across different sectors to make sure that we are able to enable a lot of people with great services.
Bringing on that, Douala is part of the Lighthouse program that was mentioned by Anne Cairns earlier today. That's a collaboration between MasterCard and NFT Ventures, and we in Fintech Mundi is also part of that. So if Anne Cairns is still in the room, we know she mentioned the Financial Inclusion Lab in Nairobi, and Douala is absolutely a good candidate for that, among several others of that. So Mats, the message is out there now. Bridging over to some of the previous session with the funding part and the collaboration between the governments and and private. There was a very good discussions that Kim had with his panel, and then and also when the governments in the Nordics they want to contribute and invest in innovative funding. And then it's over to you, Selma. You are close to the I would say the funding mechanisms, in particular here in Norway, and you're working with the UN Women and so forth. Could you tell a little bit about the funding mechanism and maybe some suggestions to the governments of Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and so forth?
Let me just start with that. I spent 30 years in the computer industry, working for commercial companies like Fujitsu, Siemens, and Hewlett-Packard, and I've just been in this business for 6 months. And I'm just trying to figure it out, because it's not very easy. I think that's the first topic is, if you come with a technology which can actually be a breakthrough for 1.7 billion people in the world, because we're talking about the unbanked 1.7, but the same unbanked people is probably the people that don't have either access at all to power or limited access to power. So you would expect that there would be a lot of people that would be very, into this. It's difficult. And I had a good laugh earlier because I think everyone that's been doing tech projects know that a lot of very, very good projects die during the piloting phase. Okay? So I think the first thing is patient money. And since the circles inside government is just set up very differently to just work more on an annual basis, it's, for developing and promoting, new products, it's not completely suitable. And when it comes to private investors, it's patience.
Any experience from your side?
Yes, a lot. So I think more than anything, as an entrepreneur, when you build a company, you build very, very lean. And like as a part of this pilot phase, you spend as little money as possible. Currently, in one of the grants that were offered, I can't access more of the funding because we need to use a certain amount of money. Usually when I run a company, I cut it tight. So I've been using less money, but we've been over-delivering in terms of project. Already 80% of the project is already done 6 months in time before. And as a part of that, also when you're talking to, so that's the governmental perspective, like how do you actually make sure that the grant that's offered is like it's set with the right criterias and that they understand also the interest when you work with partners. Do they need funding to basically understand that this is an innovation project? When there's innovation, there's risk, and then that's one like budget that you need to allocate. So making sure that that is the easy process and that you invite people in. In terms of private investors, which we gratefully have, I think it's also understanding that like, as an impact startup, you're based on the same amount of criteria as a commercial startup. Plus, you're working in an emerging market with an emerging, like with a new technology. So in that, you need to have patience, which is essential, and you basically need to understand the kind of metrics that you work on to set like what are you delivering on closely, and understanding that that needs to be designed for this specific focus, because you can't just adapt like the same kind of systems again to what you've been doing before if you're doing something new.
Going over to Magnus again, you were acquired by PayPal last year for some substantial salience. And PayPal, I understand, is quite into the financial inclusion. Is this a potential investor into financial inclusion in general and maybe teaming up with public funding?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can only reiterate what I read and what I hear the CEO Dan Schulman talk about, and it's enormous focus on financial inclusion. And I think when he a few years back he decided to change something pretty dramatic. I think also pressured actually by the card payments industry, because they were trying to pull all transactions firsthand between their PayPal accounts because that was more profitable. And says, is this really what customers want, or are we just, trying to make as much money as possible in every transaction? So they decided after a long debate that they were going to be much more open as to what type of whatever funding source the user wanted to use, they should be able to use. And we think similarly when you have VIPs in Norway, and all those things have to work if that's what the consumer wants to pay with. So he did that. They changed it to a complete different partnership strategy in order to open up to the ecosystem wherever it existed in different countries. First day they announced that strategy change, stock price fell 9%. Dan Schulman lost it, And I read an article that says, please give me a few days, to prove my strategy right. And now, of course, since that they have added 70 million new accounts or users to the PayPal system. So very much trying to work for financial inclusion. That's an obvious sort of mission within PayPal, and I think we will follow along with that, in a very good way.
Going more into the successes, Sebastian, you're part of Ask Robin and very focusing on the Latin America market. What are the successes Ask Robin has done so far, and why has it been a success?
Well, pretty much, let's start for the ugly part. Ugly part is like financial inclusion and exclusion has a lot of business with MFIs, and MFIs in Latin America has a lot of hand processing. And also, since financial services are risky business, has a lot of fraud involved. So our main fight up to the date is to try to convince the MFIs that the application of APIs and technology is good, not good by itself for the social impact. It's good by the business. So it's at times the worst enemy is the inside IT guy inside the company, because financial business is so profitable that at times no need to innovate. Okay, so that's a huge barrier. But we are fighting with a certain grade of success on that. And the good thing is that we helped 2.1 million people in Latin America to access credit, to access quality credit. Because one bad decision is not one shot. It's one bad decision that puts you in a circle of 10 following bad decisions, which affects your family, your grandchild. So that's huge advantage for us. Success for us. We also contribute with 400K people in financial literacy programs and blogs, and for us it's good.
Thank you. The successes you have, Selma, with Bright predominantly in Africa and to some degree in India, I understand. What are the successes? There are more than 2 billion?
There's 2.5 million out of these lamps out there. And in total we shipped more than, from different variations, about 2.6, something like that. So the really big successes is related to impact, because we see that in average 4 people get impacted by one lamp. These people who don't have any access to energy, so they get used by whole families. That's one. The other thing is, and we just had people into a place which is run by the UN. It's a settlement by now, because it's one of the world's oldest refugee camps that started up in 1992. And they've been very good at doing special projects together with IKEA Foundation. And one of the projects they've done is that they placed these lamps together with students, and they were monitoring how did this develop in terms of their grades. And it was interesting just by the sheer fact that the students, they could change the hours of the day. They could start earlier in the morning when it was dark because they had light to get to school. They had light when they were studying. They could take a break in the middle of the day, and they could then start again in the afternoon. The grades went up from, in average, 3.5 to 4.1. That is just... that is just impact. So, as we progress in developing different types of financial inclusion, let's just remember that before there's financial inclusion, there is power. You need power.
Thank you. You are in pilots at the moment. How is that going, and what are the insight of the successes you've done so far?
It's been great. So in December, we were the first ever use case to implement decentralized identity and do blockchain verified certificates ever on the continent. That was an amazing way to just like start, have that first user going on board the full circle is very important. Since then, now we've onboarded 4 more organizations that we work closely with, and we are issued more than 90. So we're building this very like step by step, as I said. Moving forward now, we're scaling with something called Career Imagination Program, which is a local partner that basically trains and facilitate young talent with practical skills in terms of job opportunities, which works with over 30 schools and 20,000 students, which is exciting. As a part of that, we have a project now that we're a partnership with a company called Ususu to do financial literacy and financial credit scoring as a part of their basically a skill identity in Ghana, which is something I'm very, very excited about because it showcases basically what identity needs to be and what kind of verified information that needs to be there, and that ownership should be back to the individual.
iSettle and the successes, you've grown pretty fast over the years since you started around 2010. What's happened I understand Santander is a good partnership for the Mexican...
It was actually. We no longer have the partner. We're still in Mexico and Brazil. But,
Okay.
but actually we found that we had sort of conflicting goals in the end. So we're now separate from Santander. But I think if I take one, which actually we have in common with PayPal, is we have access to card payments or payment method was how we started to democratize card payments basically. But we also look at lending. There is no working capital financing to be had for small businesses. So based on the statistics that or the data that we gather through the transactions that we see, we provide lending, and so does PayPal. PayPal had an example of, if they took a control group that didn't take funding with one that did take funding, but otherwise equal, the ones that took funding, they grew their businesses by 22%, and the other ones grew it by 2%. So there's enormous value to be provided if you can give small businesses access to capital, which they normally don't get from the banks, actually.
I think I just want to build on something in terms of what I said in like building trust. One thing we've seen is that like there's local organizations that's coming to us, which is essential. That seems we're building trust in a good way, but also in terms of this like a bridge from physical to digital. What we've done now is we also issued a feature where we're able to do basically a paper certificate but with a digital verification code that links back to the same system, right? So we're making sure that we can basically adapt the whole process in the country to make sure that like you can have trust to two processes at the same time, but it's cheaper if you move to digital systems. And that's one thing that we all know as people, we all want things cheaper. So, which has been great.
Thank you. Sebastian, why is it important to addressing women and minorities?
Great question. For us in Latin America, we still have this kind of, I don't know why in the 21st century, we have still problems with minorities and women. Okay, for me, I don't see people, women, men, I see people and capabilities. Okay? So it's important because despite of the social increase, it has a lot of financial benefits. Okay? In my culture, women are the boss of the economy. Okay? So I will give you a very short example. When I started the university, first lesson of risk management of portfolio is diversification of risk. My grandmother, she's a teacher from a rural area. She said me before I entered to the school, never put all the eggs in the same basket. Okay? So this kind of difference between academic and popular knowledge, it's held by women because they know how to. I don't want to enter to heavy stuff, but they know how to administrate better than us. Okay, in our culture. Then we have a lot of misperception that there is a how to say directly link between undevelopment and gender gap. It's not a link. Gender gap is a consequence of exclusion. So that's important because not only social and it's good by itself, in the economy itself, you're increasing the base of people who is adding value to the economy. So that's easy. beside of the philosophical questions.
In the beginning, I mentioned that we have 34 Nordic fintech companies that are targeting financial inclusion. Why does we pump above our weight when it comes to this, living in the very, very northern part of the world, and then helping out in emerging market?
Yeah. I'll speak from my own perspective. And first, it comes of knowing my privilege, which is very essential. I've always been very, very passionate about human rights, and as a part of that, I am born with a lot of it. Like with the Norwegian passport, I can go everywhere I want. I have been having student government loans. That's enabled me to study for 7 years, as well as I've worked. But I think it's essential because why I wanted also to come back. I've been living 9 years abroad. I wanted to come back. I want to start a company out of Norway, out of specific ethics, out of a work ethic in terms of how we work, out of also making sure we're a country of trust, also because we have the privilege to, which is something that I want to make sure that we can inspire and build moving forward. Like even as a government, when we go out and we support systems, we need to make sure that the transparency and trust that we work with, it comes across in the work that we do. And that's what we are very passionate to do.
Fantastic.
Very short one. I will give you a personal example. I raised in a slum in the middle of very far southern country. I'm half deaf, but I got education and I got opportunities. So now I'm a productive young adult, and I'm adding value in Nordic economies, not in mine. So that's how you can improve, benefit the economical side. The same thing, I'm trying to, as a Rotary member, I'm trying to spread the voice of the advantages of having a better life, of increasing the condition of life of people, not only by itself, always go to economical, okay, it's profitable. You are increasing economic activity, tax contribution, human rights, so think it as a business. Forget about the political and philosophic, if you don't care. Think it as business. It's good, because it will grow your business.
Magnus, you started out, as I understand, with a cup of coffee with Mats in 2010, discussing whether or not you should start iSettle together with your co-founder. Did Sweden and the Nordic have any kind of lift for you in that sense, or?
Absolutely, and I sort of listening to. I agree with all the things that was said before, but I think the fact that we're so mature a region when it comes to digitization and smartphone penetration, and we have the Nokia and the Ericsson, and we have all in common that we're very small countries that go international very early. So those two forces basically, without the smartphone revolution, there would be no financial inclusion the way we see it today, right? So I think that's really driving it, and it's our home base that sort of has experienced it first. Moving ones and zeros is basically what we feel comfortable with. So, so I think that has a very sort of big sort of explanatory part in this.
With that basis, what more can we do to help out take away financial exclusion?
To take away financial exclusion. Well, you talked about gender before, and why that was important or not, and obviously, I feel little bit I'm a different animal when we sit here, and that we are working with small businesses and not maybe to the consumer. But when I look at gender, you could start with yourself, right? So we did a few years ago. We looked at our company. So are we really paying equitably in the company for the same job between men and women? And we found we didn't. So we changed that. It was expensive, but it was correct, right? And I've just happened to have seen exactly the same thing going on at PayPal. So I think if you start working like that, and if you start analyzing our customer base, half of it is women. And who are the people that are most underbanked and underfinanced? It's women. So I think by offering credit based on data of their business rather than on their gender, they should get as much funding as a man and a woman should get. So those are the type of the thinking, at least that I try to follow.
A lot of good suggestions, success stories. Yeah, you mentioned a few of the challenges. Getting into the more closing remarks, what are the dreams and the next steps for each of your companies? Starting with you, Thea.
Well, first and foremost, I would love people that I work with to be able to empathize, I can't speak today, more in terms of the context, because very little people know the market that we're working in, but you need to understand, you need to start feeling what this actually has to do, and then you need to start involving yourself. That's one dream, that we can all just look at each other, talk, and basically meet our stories more unified and kill the perception and judgment that comes along in those conversations. Second, I want to scale fast. I don't want to talk. We want to work. We want to work, and what we do need to do that is we need the right funding partners and we need the right collaborations. That's what we're constantly doing. But I just want to make sure that we all leave this room with one action point and we execute on it. That's what we do in Douala, and that's my ultimate dream for today.
Fantastic. Ask Robin, Sebastian.
For us, it's basically two sides. Educate and contribute to the financial education of as many possible people, not only in Latin America, the world. Because education is the key of everything, of inclusion and exclusion also. That's on the philosophical, and of course it's a part of the business, but mostly on the philosophical side of our credo. And the other side is to being consistently more and more a true advocate for people. Because when you ask for a loan in Latin America, mostly, people is here, financial institutions are here. We are making this with us, Robin, slowly, because it's hard, but we are getting it. So people now, it's not dependent, we are empowering people. Short history.
Fantastic. Selma, Bright.
My dream is that none of the people that don't have electricity today will actually have access, not only to electricity, but to sustainable electricity. Because there's another part of 2019 is that we know that there is climate change. It's not a thing that's going to happen. It's happening. Actually, just a little fact around that, UN reported in 2017 that they had more displaced people because of climate than political unrest. So that's my first thing, and that this will then enable people to educate, to build their business, to get inclusive in the financial world, and that way see that places, people, and countries will expand in the world and actually create a better future for themselves.
Fantastic. Magnus, you have the closing for
Well,
ISET.
so many fine words, but I think when I spoke to Mats 9 years ago, and when I had decided to start ISET together with my co-founder, it was really based on my own upbringing, in a small business owner family, and knowing all the hardships that you go through as a small business owner. And that's, they have that in common all over the world, They have no money and they have no time. And that's sort of, if you can help small business owners with that. And, I'm a growth junkie in a way, so I really want to make that happen. We have 500,000 small businesses as customers today in ISETL. PayPal has 20 million companies that are still not ISETL customers. So we have a lot of work to do, and I'd really like to make our services available to small businesses around the world. That's
fantastic. As a last remark, this is a quote from Ajay Banga, the CEO of MasterCard. Inclusive growth will come through tangible actions that will give people a pathway to prosperity. So with that note, thank you very much, panel.